So I don't know if you ever heard or can recall the term "devil's in the details." It's really the devil or the god that you worship, because most people are worshiping an idea of themselves, a higher ontological idea of the self. And this is where the problem starts, really where it arises. Like the sun, Horus, is where we're looking at the fact that what you esteem as you isn't you at all. The devil's in the details. Where did you get the original idea from? Where did the idea of yourself come from? Can you trace back the kinetic chain, the connection to how you got involved in certain things? Say you're into athletics, or you're really nerdy and you're into computers, right? Or maybe you're an animator and you're really into, you were really into comic books when you were young. What incited the interest? So a lot of people start to talk about family lines, right? They go back and they say, oh, my uncle got me involved in this at an early age, or, my siblings, a friend, maybe a stranger. Maybe it was a situational awareness brought about from an experience that you had, right? So our experiences are a chain that justify the self. And at some point, we no longer go back to that reminder of, this nostalgia. So the nostalgia is when you're connected to whatever force is intently drawing you in and trying to get you to become a literal conduit or an aspect to this computational system that keeps this directive alive, right? So it keeps coursing energy through this particular junction point that manifests itself in you, but you are being taken along for a ride. Because ultimately, what we see around us broadly is that none of these, so the devil's in the details, you could look at it as a singular lifetime, or you could look at it as a succession, or really a regression, because nothing's going on correct here, right? Like, for instance, the Bible is something that doesn't bring God to you, doesn't bring principles to you, yet it is used as a firewall in order to absolve or constitute a legal action or a law that says, or a law, right? That says, and that's not giving penance or credence to the Bible, but it is all one aspect to the same God, which is a supplication back to a directive that is very binaural in nature. It is geometria. God isn't found in the geometria details. The God that you choose is the God that you supplicate to. The God that you secretly worship can only be with the neocortex and the pineal gland and the amygdala come to this uniform sort of Ornstein alliance, right, within the self. And that is displayed existentially with the people that represent those symbols on the outside. So in other words, you have your rationalist, right? I'm thinking about Outsiders, the Appalachians. It didn't end too well. Second season, they're obviously planning on going on to a third season. No one wanted to pick it up. But the biggest misnomer is that this child that passed away far too young and was really sacrificed by the cult, his name is Elon. And this isn't like an old, this is going back like 9 or 10 years, right, when it was made. And then some of the two protagonists in the story is Big Foster and Little Foster, right? And really this idea of sort of this despotic ruler, Big Foster, where people know that he is like the devil and that he represents a very left-hand path, but they follow him anyway because he is a warrior. In other words, he's willing to kill for his ideology, right? So he doesn't care how expansive or how deep or how pure the God is that he follows. He is going to try and represent the God that he knows keeps him alive, gives him sustenance. And so it's a very like Wiccan conceptualization or idea of the show, right? And then you have Guinevere, the one who everybody believes in and ends up putting as the Bren-in. I was looking it up and it's spelled Bren/in. I thought it was the Brennan because that's how they pronounce it, but it's the Bren-in. And I think it does go back to the O'Brien family because this is based on sort of an occultism where these folks came here over 200 years ago, and they brought with them a lot of the sort of paganistic beliefs from their home country, which was, they obviously fled Ireland. And it was probably during some sort of plague or famine that swept across the country. I don't know, but that's the inference. There's absolutely no Christian ideology whatsoever. So you get into this idea of these sort of fae lore and elementals and the very personas of the people, the past Brennans and other people that passed away that had to be buried on this land, this hilltop. And the wrong side wins over and over again. It's not this just. There is too much justice, carnal, worldly justice involved, but there's not just a cosmic, universal, purified order, right? Hub. Things never work out like that, right? So you kind of see this trickster modality occur, and that's exactly what's happening. It's so easy to trap human beings, in other words, into an ideology and to crux existentially. That is to sort of go through this pathos rhetoric and sway to take a component out of through neurolinguistic programming out of somebody's intended purposes within themselves, right? Which again, we have to ask ourselves: is that existentially crux within them from the first place, right? Is this phenomenon where you think you're interacting with God, and because by contrast, just juxtaposed, antithetically, you have this terrible existence. So the storyline even gets into that, where this child, Big Foster, is said to be dead in the final few episodes, the final second season, and they'd gone through this conspiracy to get rid of him and kill him off. And ironically, the very person that thinks that he killed him off ends up getting torn apart by these wolves and Asa, and he just yields to these wolves because the ontology or the animism won't let him go, because what kept them alive and what got them there was living according to this nature Luciferian Wiccan ontological way. And if this sounds off track or offbeat, and in other words, Big Foster was saved, but he was ironically saved by this extremely corrupted family, where you have the degradation of and the commitment seen fully disclosed of why the Farrell family line stayed there from the time up in the Appalachian Mountains, stayed there from the time that they came to the U.S. Right? Didn't want to integrate in because they knew that a corruption was taking place. So in contrast, if you look at these layers of this sort of veneer and you're just sort of superimpose over society the Farrell's way of existence, to see them as heathens or base type people being very corrupt, almost primordial. Well, the case is that they have more principles and follow more of an order because they are removed from the corruptions of society, right? The stuff Thomas Jefferson talked about waking up, that we in this generation, really was what he was referring to, are going to be waking up on the shores of the lands our forefathers fought and died for. We'll be waking up homeless and without a skill, because we don't have the probity or the David Hume inferred principles within us. So that we follow and practice existentially. So, a lot of great philosophers have talked about this, where, God is in everything. But if the God that we recognize isn't within ourselves, then when we get to this computational model, or this sort of Konrad Zuse, Alan Turing, even Jacobo Grinberg, which I bring up whenever I bring those names up, because I think it's important to understand this sort of this Bohm Heim, right, Burkhard Heim model, where you really are looking at a phenomenon that John Dee, Edward Kelly, and several other people, Bruno, asserted, and we're looking at, where there's this acknowledgement that you're either going to be supplicating toward survival and you're going to try to live up to this higher stage of being, like the chessboard, like royalty. But over and over again, what you find is that, like my family fleeing Germany 300 plus years ago, right? Exactly 300 years ago. So 1726 was, yeah. So 300 years ago, this is actually the coming up on the anniversary between the 26th and the 2026, 2028. So these folks came along much further after. They obviously didn't join in and weren't part of the whole society of the Cincinnatus or the Cincinnati, but they were an integral aspect of the preservation, at least in this show, and possibly in reality, to just sort of look at this phenomenon of the Appalachians through discourse, and to say that there had to be preserved some way of, quote unquote, the old country, right? The old rules, the way that things were, because they haven't really changed. Even though it seems like we're in this high-tech state or stage of evolution, we're really not, right? We're really not. We deal with the same principles, we deal with the same practicum or the practical methods of going about our day. People succumb to the same types of but growing, right? You have more heart disease, things that are brought about through machinations, like from the COVID jab, and there's ever more intricate and more detailed matrices to try to travel our way through and make it through. But what are we really trying to do? Where is the other side? So really that show does a good job, because at the end of the 13th episode of the second season of Outsiders, they became leaderless. They capitulated between two sides. You have Guinevere supplicating to really the siren or the mermaid, who will be on anyone's side but has her own agenda and is always weaving this sort of spider web, right? And plays the victim and whispers sweet nothings like Mother Circe, right? Fattening up the people so that she can consume their very essence of their souls, right? And doesn't see that she's really doing this, right? Or fails to acknowledge it. And then you have over here on the other side, that's kind of occurring today from a despotic ruling factor, which is you have Big Foster, who's going to save everyone, but in doing so, turning an entire supplicating class of people into really class tyrants, right? They're working for one main cause, and that is to rape, pillage, and destroy, and that's the mantra of the Warrior's Code of how you survive. And then you have this person that's stuck in the middle, that's the offspring of Big Foster, right? And it's strange because there's a skipped generation as well. So there's Big Foster, who's Big Foster the 6th, and then his son is Big Foster the 8th. But then you wonder, well, where's Middle Foster, right? So there's a lot of little trails built into the fabric, the matrix of this programming. It's not too deep or too complex. Every time they venture into the town below, there's just further corruption, and it's typically where they're drawn in and they have to start to take this artifact called money and actually look at it as if it has a value. And we know for certain that it doesn't. August 15th or 14th or 15th, 1971, Nixon breaking that whole Bretton Woods treaties or cycle, where we look at a total unpegging of the U.S. dollar, where you could say that that's really the true birth and the acknowledgement of not only a petrodollar but a labor slavery dollar, where the cycle was invariably trapped in and there was no more pegging to a gold standard. We still live in that sort of liminal space today, more so than ever, as Bitcoin and cryptocurrency trends and tends to take its place, when it's just ether, it's just codified vapor. So a lot of the things that were contended in that programming are pretty important to look at. I'm kind of thinking of the Blood Meridian, the Judge in Blood Meridian, and what that really means. So if you wanted to get more in depth or in detail, you could probably go onto Michael Segru's channel and look a lot of the discourse up that I talk about in prior videos when discussing that master in philosophy.